Welcome to Neighborhood Narratives, our series spotlighting local authors from South Florida.
We're excited to be joined by Palm Beach County native Rachel Frazin and co-author of Poisoning the Well, How Forever Chemicals Contaminated America, a deep investigation on essentially environmental neglect by governmental and corporate entities and the impact and devastation of communities across the nation. In addition to being a local, Rachel is also a Northwestern University alum, which makes this particularly meaningful to me as also a Wildcat myself. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this.
Yes. So to just jump right in, tell us a little bit more about your book and what kind of drew you and your co-author towards writing a story about Forever Chemicals.
Absolutely. So, while I am a Palm Beach County native, I now spend most of my time up in Washington, D.C., where I cover energy and environment policy for the Hill. So, that is like what is the government doing or not doing about issues like climate change, about issues like toxic chemicals, about, our national parks, all different kinds of things. And on one of my first weeks on the job, the House was voting on a bill called the PFAS Action Act, which was a bunch of words that I was like, I don't know what this means. So I start Googling PFAS, and it was one of those things that, like, once you start going down this rabbit hole, like, I could not claw my way back out of the rabbit hole. This was living rent-free in my brain that there was this class, this family of toxic chemicals out there that are in the bloodstream of virtually every American that's contaminating drinking water all across this country, and that frankly, the corporations had a lot of knowledge about and still continued to make and produce, and was, just so ubiquitous in all kinds of things, from like firefighting foam to nonstick pans to bandages. And so my colleague Sharon, when she first arrived at the Hill, we learned that we both sort of had this joint fascination with this topic. And so we wrote a series for the Hill on some of the legal hurdles that, victims of contamination face when they're trying to get compensation for like illnesses that they may have developed as a result potentially of that exposure. We wrote that series, but we kind of thought there's more to this story that we need to tell. And, we want to create sort of a guide for people who are interested, who want to learn more, but don't really know where to start, that sort of helps people understand this issue in an accessible way.
One of the most powerful things about the book itself is how personal it feels. Of course, you delve into the legal frameworks and the politics of it, which we'll get into later. But the stories around it, they really, I've cried a couple of times when I read it. So, you and Sharon center on stories of real families and communities infected by the contamination. How did you both decide which stories to, feature?
And there are so many people and so many heartbreaking stories. So, the stories we feature in the book are important, but they are certainly not the only ones. But when we were putting together the structure of our story, we realized we wanted to talk about certain aspects of this story. We wanted to tell it in a way that made sense as a narrative. And so we picked communities that we thought were emblematic of, different aspects of this story, although they are by no means the only ones. And so specifically, that is in Alabama, we wanted to talk about, the historic pollution, of the corporate contamination. We wanted to also talk about, the military's role in all of this and military related contamination. So we go to Colorado for that. We wanted to talk about farming and agriculture and the way that this has been spread across farmlands and gets into the food supply. And we knew that that was a big issue in Maine. So that's where we went. And we also wanted to talk about, the ways in which this has changed from the start when this was, just a few chemicals, and some of the newer chemicals that are in this same family that are still contaminating drinking water supplies, and the ways in which this is going on today. And we knew that North Carolina was facing some contamination with these newer chemicals. And so that's why we focused in on those four.
Yes, and your story or your book also takes on unpacking how race and class and politics kind of intersect with this issue. So what did your reporting uncover about the unequal burden among
Yeah.
those? Mhm.
Well, it's interesting because, first of all, PFAS is not just a poor issue. It's not just a black issue. This is something that is impacting everybody. But
Mhm.
that burden is not always equal. It is something that also can be co-occurring with other sorts of pollution. And, historically, low-income communities and communities of color have had to bear the brunt of that burden. And, PFAS, again, these sites are based in, these often what are known as environmental justice communities, communities that have had this historic pollution, not just from PFAS, but from other chemicals, which could be sort of compounding the impacts here. And so that is really unequitable. And something else that we learned is that even in communities where this is hitting, both poor and rich, black and white, there are disparities as far as who gets access to solutions and information. And so, like in Wilmington, North Carolina, for example, this is something. Wilmington, North Carolina is, a wealthier and, in some places whiter community for the most part. That's not to say there's no poverty there. And but I think that one of the things that we noticed was, well, the water utility really did take action and put in some water filtration in certain places. But, the rural, black elderly community nearby was not, they had started the work to get that community hooked up to that say now safe water system. But it took a few years for people to even realize, oh shoot, those people are also affected by this and they're not on this water system. And that's not to say that they're not doing the work to get those folks on the system too, but I think that when this first came up, you know, if they didn't subscribe to the newspaper, they didn't know about this because
Mhm.
broke by the local newspaper.
Right. I mean, this was already mentioned previously, but the stories that you cover center in the book are heartbreaking. Um, families decimated, people losing their farmland after generations. And as a reader, it's impossible not to feel the grief with these individuals, I guess. But on the flip side, is a story of resistance and organizing, which I think is really important that you all focused on. I guess, how did you navigate the emotional weight of these stories? Did you do a lot of one-on-one interviews? How was that process? And essentially, how did you as an author and as a reporter, mentally was able to get through it?
Yeah, no, it was tough. And there were some interviews that I walked away from and I was like, I just want to go home and cry into my pillow because that was so disturbing to hear what people are going through and to hear about the illness and the loss that they're facing. But like you said, there is also uplifting pieces of this story. There are community activists who are doing the work, who are, part maybe a piece of their story is sad, but the work that they're doing is also really inspiring. And so I think that, in order to, I guess, stay sane and not fall into a pit of despair, you kind of have to look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers would say.
Mhm. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Because apart from the book, you also have a career in investigative journalism, which I'm sure you encounter a lot of stories that are similar, maybe for different issues. So, in general, what drew you to this career path?
Yeah, so again, I am extraordinarily lucky, is number one. I I first, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be an actor. I think that might be the equivalent of like a kid today wanting to be an influencer. I like wanted to be on the Disney Channel and like do all that. And then I kind of realized for a few reasons that that was not happening for me. One being I can't sing or dance, so that a big part of that field. So, in my teen years, I kind of thought to myself, like, okay, what do I like? What do I want to do? And I like talking to people. I like learning new things. I like finding things out. And I want to make the world a better place. And so that sort of led me to journalism. I participated. I don't know if it's still in existence, but at that time, the Sun Sentinel had a program called Teen Link, where you could practice writing like op-eds and articles, to go for like for teens and in the local community. And so I participated in that program as in high school. And then when I got into college, I was very lucky to get into Northwestern, into the Medill School of Journalism. And so I thought, you know what? All right, the universe is sending me down this path. And so, but then on the environment side, it was something I very much lucked into. When I was in college, I wanted to cover immigration, and obviously those issues are also still extremely pressing and important. But I think that there was an opening on our team for an environment reporter where I was working, and I thought, I could do that. I'm from Florida. We've got beaches, we've got solar energy,
Not
got
that we
We
have
have it everywhere.
beaches.
planes, like that. I know nature and the environment, and so but I came in knowing almost nothing, and I have fallen in love with this beat because I get to tell stories like this, because I get to, you know, help educate the public on what the government is and is not doing to protect them from toxics.
I want to talk about your journey as a published author, but before, there's a part in this book that, and correct me if I'm misremembering, um, where a council member, and I forget what location, was unseated. A high school senior unseated an incumbent because of, I guess, how the incumbent was moving in relation to how the city or the municipality and the corporation was settling with the contamination. Correct me if I'm wrong. I was just like, that blew my mind away to know that the city voted for a high school. One, I didn't know that was even possible for as someone who works for a municipality, that someone who hasn't even gotten their diploma yet could do that. So I don't know what question I want to get to that, but I just wanted to say, what was your thoughts on that?
Um,
And like, why did it lead to that?
Well, my co-author Sharon is the one who did that reporting, so I
Okay.
probably not, I can't get into the nitty-gritty, but I just think it was interesting, the broader picture of, the potential influence of these issues on small town politics. And,
Yeah.
this touches every aspect, right? Like we've got there's a lot of talk, I feel like, about the ways that corporations can influence national decision makers, as far as corporate lobbying, as far as, campaign contributions and things like that. But, there can be impacts and influence. And that's not to say, I'm not trying to say that, this company specifically put this person into this position or anything, but it seems like, in local politics, this can also play a role.
All right. But I just had to touch on that. I was right. I had to read. I was like, is this for real? Anyways, but so a lot of the people part of our neighborhood narratives are self-published, but we are indie published. But with you, you're traditionally published. And I would like to one really get an insight of how maybe your experience as a Palm Beach local, or then going to Evanston and then going to DC, how that shaped your publishing career or your path to be an author, and two, any piece of advice you can give to other aspiring authors and writers.
Yeah, well, first of all, growing up in Palm Beach County, and I'm from Boca Raton specifically, was, just such a joy. And I know that Florida can get a bad rap, but I think that it is a truly wonderful place to grow up, where I developed a love for nature, going to the beach and uh visiting the Everglades and things like that. And really, I think that that's just such a part of the culture. And then I think another thing about Florida culture that I think is underrated is that we are straightforward people. We will tell you what we're thinking, and we don't take bullshit from anybody. People in Florida tell it like it is. And so I think that that is something in my journalism career that has served me well, because, if someone is saying something to me and I don't believe it, I'm gonna let them know, and so I feel like it has made me sort of very straightforward, very no nonsense, very not beat around the bush. And I think that that is something that has really served me, both in my day job as a journalist and then also in publishing. Traditional publishing is an interesting beast, and I think that I was very lucky, because I think that a lot of getting your book traditionally published has to do with like what platform do you have, and
Mhm.
the journalists that helped to give me a platform that I think was more marketable. I think that, I know that a lot of people, when they write books, sort of see it as their art. And I think that that's amazing. But I think that when you're trying to sell a book, especially the traditional way, the way to do that is you have to market it like a product, right? You can't just say, this is my art and it's beautiful and it's amazing. And here, like, you have to sort of first convince an agent and then help them convince a publisher that this isn't just something amazing that you produce, that this is something that people are willing to pay for. And I know that that can be sort of the less
Attractive.
attractive, exactly, side of the industry, but it is sort of what you have to do. And I think that again, I'm very lucky that a topic that absolutely fascinates me is one that I think there is growing awareness about, growing interest in, and one that, I was ultimately found to be marketable in a traditional publishing manner.
Thank you. And I think that's part of the reason your point about like is the platform you have. I hear that a lot from, in this writer space that, people take pains to get their social media following up and so forth to make them more attractive to literary agents. Hence why a lot of people are maybe going the indie and self-publishing route. But it's amazing that you've had the support of traditional publishing. So that is another path, and it's still feasible. Let me not say accessible, feasible for other authors. And then I think another question I have, and what do you hope readers gain from reading Poisoning the Well? What type of steps you want to take in their own personal lives or on a bigger level? Yeah.
Well, I hope that people walk away with an understanding of the fact that these toxic chemicals are in the bloodstream of every last one of us, because these were made and used and dumped for decades by corporations and by the military, and that it is impacting our health. And because these are forever chemicals, because they last a very long time, it is impacting our children's health, our grandchildren's health, future generations. And I hope that people walk away not just feeling, again, depressed, but also, empowered and inspired to do something about it for a few reasons, to look into their own water situation, look up their drinking water system and say, hey, is this stuff in my water? And if it is, to take steps to protect themselves, whether that's sort of on a consumer level by buying, appropriate water filtration, on an advocacy level, by going to their water system and demanding that they install filters, and generally taking steps to protect themselves and their neighbors and to keep making noise about this issue.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it extends even past like the forever chemicals, because now we're having this issue with AI data centers, especially like here in our area, in Florida, where, corporations again are coming here, trying to use up resources, and it is affecting the water and the air.
And the decision of where they're putting it and which communities will be impacted the most is very reminiscent of the communities you interviewed and explored.
100%. Are there any other topics that you're currently investigating, or any future books that we can expect or look out for?
No future books at the moment. I'm taking a little bit of a break, a little bit of, putting more life into the work-life balance, as it will. But, for my day job for The Hill, I am still covering energy and environment policy. And so, sort of keeping up with this administration, especially, and what they are doing as it relates to energy and the environment. You can find that work at thehill.com. I do a lot of news of the day in that role, but I am doing my best to, work on bigger projects as well.
And last thing, can you tell anyone watching this, our audience, where they can get a copy of Poisoning the Well, especially if you have a website, because we like to have it directly from the author, and not through us.
Well, obviously, you can buy it via embargoed editions, would be the number one choice. But yeah, we've got the publisher has a website, Island Press, which I published through, was actually recently acquired by Princeton University Press. And so I guess that would be my next best recommendation, is print to get it directly from the publisher at Princeton University Press. And so I don't have my own author website, but I am on social media. You can find me on X or on Blue Sky, as well as on Instagram. And so that is where you can find out more about me and about the book.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking your time out of your day.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate, you being willing to talk with me about the book, and hopefully help get the word out there.
All right. Bye, Rachel.
Bye. Have a good day.
You too. Have a good one.